welcome to this week's webinar for Irish Rural Link, which is going to deal with the issue of rural isolation. It's a major issue, particularly among middle-aged people, older members of our community, and of course, those living in isolated rural areas. The Irish Longitudinal Study on Ageing, TILDA, estimates that around 400,000 people in Ireland suffer from loneliness. Older people engaged in agriculture, people living alone in rural areas, suffering high levels of isolation, and of course the wider general population. There is generally a greater awareness now of people's need to be connected with others and to their community. And our panel will discuss some of those initiatives, supports that have emerged over the last few years. It's clear that mental well-being comes into this in a major way, and it's clear that the value of mental health, whether it's combating loneliness and isolation, is now ranked as high as combating any other health problem. Many organisations across the country fulfil this role, and this morning we have representatives from some of them, and we will introduce them right now. Firstly, we have Finola Colgan. Finola is the mental health promotion, working alongside voluntary statutory agencies. She's an advocate of personal development and self-care, particularly in the current times. She's a regular contributor of articles on mental health and resilience to the regional and national press, including the Farmers Journal, the Midland Tribune, Farming Independent, and she is the co-author of Coping with Pressures of Farming with Barry Caslin of Teagasc. So welcome, Finola.
Good morning, Barry. Or good morning, Seamus, I should say.
Okay.
How are you doing?
It's okay. Aisling Maroney is, of course, coming from Leitrim this morning. She is the Policy Officer of Social Farming Ireland. This is a national network based in Leitrim and brings a unique way of managing situations of farming into combating loneliness and other aspects, and she will deal with that as well. TP O'Gorman, good morning, Aisling.
Morning, Seamus. Morning, all.
Good. TP O'Gorman works with Men's Sheds. He's a native of Tipperary and Kilbeggan, and is formerly a primary school teacher. He has been involved in community affairs for many years, and he is presently Westmeath's Men's Sheds voluntary coordinator, dealing with the affairs of interest to a dozen or more sheds in the country. So good morning, TP.
Morning, Seamus. Morning, all. Wash your hands.
Morning, TP.
Wash your hands.
Yeah.
TP, as you can see, is en route. He's in the back of a van at the moment, but he's fine. Conor O'Leary of Muintir na Tíre. Conor is an old friend of Irish Rural Links. He is Community Alert Development Officer with the Eastern Region, Muintir na Tíre, supporting 300 community alert groups in mid-north Leinster and general areas. This is a programme he will explain more about with the Garda Síochána. It promotes safety and security, and it is going something around 30 years. Conor also participated in the Community Champions programme with Irish Rural Link and the Wheel earlier in the year, and that will come up in the course of this morning's conversation. So you're all welcome, and so are you who have registered for the webinar and are joined in. Remember, you can ask questions using the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we will take those questions as we go along this morning. This is a conversation, so we will hope to learn a little bit more about rural isolation as the morning goes on. So if I may start with you, Conor. Muintir na Tíre, a very well and established organisation. How are you managing it in the context of rural isolation?
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Seamus and Irish Rural Link, to come on this morning. Look, isolation is something that has been always with us, and it presents itself in many forms, and we hear it through the 1,500 community alert groups around the country that we work with, because I suppose they're at the coalface of it. It's the people in their communities who are isolated and living alone, who really experience this. And I know the first time it really struck me was when I was talking to one of the providers that provides the socially monitored alarms, the pendant alarm scheme that some of the listeners will be familiar with this morning. Those alarms, you know, they provide a lot of safety and security to people. If they have a problem, they press the button. It can be a pendant or something around the wrist. When they press the button, they're put through to a monitoring station and help can be got. It could be the Gardaí or it could be a neighbour or a friend. And they told me that, you know, they get a lot of calls through those, but they get a lot of what they call false alarms. And over a period of time, they realized that those false alarms, they weren't false alarms at all. That was loneliness. There was people who were pressing the button because they had no one else to talk to and they wanted to speak to someone in the monitoring station. And I suppose, you know, it really sinks home that sense of loss, that sense of, you know, unconnectedness. And yet there are so many good things happening around the country, so many groups reaching out to people, and it's a battle we just have to keep fighting all the time. So that's how we really experience it and see it in a very raw way.
Great. And I suppose in that sense, and we'll come back to that because I think what Community Alert in particular does and the work of Muintir Tíre is useful. Finola, you're involved in the mental health area, and there's been a lot said about mental health and the contribution of loneliness to it. In terms of, again, talking about rural isolation, that Tilda report says 400,000 people experience loneliness. Can you give us a light on the work you do and how you see it?
Okay, so good morning to everyone as well, and to our participants here with us. Seamus, I suppose the starting point often with mental health for me over the years has been like mental health, like sadly, there's always been a stigma attached to it. And often people would say to me, like, Finola, don't talk about mental health. Why not talk about emotional health? And like, but you're like talking about cancer or talking about diabetes, you're talking about health. So when you're talking about topics like depression, like loneliness, and how it impacts on your mental health, that's what's compromised. And like what Conor and I know what Ashton's going to be talking about in TP and the organizations that they work with, they're addressing that issue of loneliness to try to minimize it. And for some reason or another, sometimes people don't want to disclose that they're feeling lonely. And so I think as a group and as a nation, we need to ask what is contributing to the loneliness? Why are people feeling lonely? And is it lack of support? Is it lack of confidence? Are there enough supports there to support people? Like one of the big issues, I've seen it in my own growing up many years ago in Lismore in County Waterford, when my father reached a certain age, everybody was saying to him, oh, you mustn't be driving the car anymore. Now, I'm going back, obviously, a nice few decades in that. And kind of withdrawing that type of communication and that ability to connect, I think impacts on mental health. And if we look at mental health as like, you know, in the World Health Organization, we'll talk about it, many other agencies, that mental health is about how you're coping and how you're feeling. And if you're not coping well, then your mental health is compromised. If you're not feeling confident, your mental health is compromised. And that's why it's so important that we've many support organizations, many promotional campaigns to encourage people to connect and link in with people. And I know that's a big, massive part of Irish Rural Link. You know, you've done massive work in that area, Seamus, because you've brought people together and you've got communicating and talking.
I see already people are coming in. Robert McDermott and Michael O'Conager will come to you in a moment and the questions you're asking. TP, men's sheds have certainly been an innovative intervention over the last few years. They're doing a lot of good work in terms of bringing men together. And we know with studies, men experience a lot of loneliness in this area. So how are you managing it through men's sheds?
Thanks, Seamus. Good morning, everybody. I suppose, like just listening to Finola and Conor there, the certain commonalities attached to the men's shed movement as well in what it does. So we all kind of are hitting the same issues, I suppose, from a different angle. I suppose where I look at it from the point of view is kind of like the third age, the men's shed. By and large, even though it's not true, the men's shed is open to all men from 18 upwards, up to 100, whatever. But by and large, it seems to cater at the present time for retired people and obviously unemployed people as well. But in recent times, the unemployment wasn't a problem. It probably is going to be another problem now when this thing is over. So basically your youthful years are full of activity, and you're going to school and you're meeting loads of buddies and all the rest of it, and you have your teammates and your friends and your colleagues, and you have a lot going on. And then generally speaking, you fall into the next thing is a job. So you're working with colleagues by and large. You have a workforce around you and so on, and you have company, and you're busy anyway with a lot of stuff going on. You might get married, you have your own family, you're rearing them, you're building a house, you're paying all the bills and all the rest of it. And you come through, it's like the Grand National for me in a kind of a way. Then you come to the end of the race when you retire of a type, and you've come over the last fence and you're coming up to the finish line, and you think, God, I've done it all. It's going to be all happy from here on in. But for a lot of men, that's not what happens, because all that support scheme you had, I suppose, all through your life that you never even thought about is suddenly pulled out from under you, because you don't have a workplace to go to. Your family are probably by and large gone away. So if you're lucky enough to have a good woman with you, you're at home, and like you need a bit more than that. So that's where the men's shed comes into the mix. Now, I didn't ever think I'd need to go to a men's shed, because like Finola was saying there, it's like the mental health thing. You don't want to admit to yourself that you might have a problem in some shape or fashion. But having retired from teaching, and teaching's a very active kind of an occupation because you're meeting a lot of people. But I found after the first 12 months, 18 months, Jenny, the phone's not ringing. There's no one calling. I thought it was important. What a fool. Like, I don't have this network anymore. So just so happened then that a number of us locally heard about the concept of the men's shed. We said, right, we investigated, visited a few sheds and thought, hey, we can do this, because we'd seen what the other guys had done. And suddenly what we found was we had a new network of friends, like friends that we actually knew in our locality, but they weren't friends. They were visible to us. We saw them on the street, but we never chatted them, because you met them coming out of mass, or you saw them in the pub and they were down the far end and you waved at them, but you never had the opportunity. And now, next thing is you meet at the men's shed, and suddenly, hey, the friends, these guys become your friends for life, if you like, because this is different kind of friendship now altogether. This is friendship of a voluntary nature. You're going there because you want to be there. And what I'd say for a lot of men, it's like Finola just mentioned relative to mental health, a lot of men are afraid to make that step to go to the men's shed, because they feel, I'm not old enough for that. Sure, that's all our lads and whatnot, and they're gone past it, and they're lonely and they're depressed, and I'm not any of those things. But it's not. It's actually the dead opposite. And I think what it does then is it boosts your ego. It boosts, if it needs boosting, it boosts your confidence, because you're suddenly meeting a whole range of different types of people: guards, Bord na Móna workers, all strands of society, if you like. But there's no pecking order. There's no hierarchy. Everybody's on an equal footing. Nobody's going to tell you what to do kind of anymore. So basically, that's where it was a huge, I think that's mainly the thing for the men's shed.
Okay, thank you very much, TP. That's a very passionate description. Aisling, I suppose you're a network of social farming. It's not necessarily set up to deal with rural isolation, but there is a lot of rural isolation in general farming anyway. So just firstly, give me an outline of what social farming is about.
Okay, so social farming, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a very simple idea, really. It's about giving people with sort of range of kind of different sort of challenges in life the opportunity to spend time on ordinary Irish farms, really, with farmers, with their families. To me, put it most simply, it brings two groups of people together, I think, in society. We have farmers, some farmers who, live in beautiful places, who have skills, who have life skills, who have maybe spare capacity in terms of time, maybe talking about maybe more farmers who maybe wouldn't be operating intensively, and who want to give something back to society, who tend to be quite community minded, want to give something back, want to do something different. And then we have groups of people in society who would benefit hugely from getting the opportunity to be on those farms, and making those connections with the farmers. And so people with mental health challenges, people with intellectual disabilities, young people who are maybe just struggling a little bit at a certain stage of life, people with dementia. You know, we have a huge kind of wide range of people who can benefit from being on the farm. I think two kind of very important things about social farming to note, and there's a bit of overlap here what TP is saying, I'm sure he'd agree with me. I think it's so much better, particularly with men, and though we have a lot of women who do social farming too, if you're brought together around tasks, around a common purpose, around achieving things together, rather than let's all sit around and talk to one another and drink tea. Of course, there's a lot of sitting around and talking to one another and drinking tea. And we always say the kitchen table is the most important piece of farm equipment in social farming. But I think that's really important. So it's the focus is sort of taken off I'm so lonely, let's connect. It's not about that, but you're addressing a lot of those things in a sort of a roundabout way. So I think that's really important. So we always talk in social farm, there's three kind of main elements. There's the being out in nature, working with animals, the cycles of life, observing new life, all of those things which are so good for our mental health and well-being. There's the meaningful tasks, it's a very, there's something very purposeful about it, something really positive about it, contributing to the growing of food and the care of animals and all of that. And then the third element then, of course, is the social connection, which is so important. And I just think social farming seems to just tap into something in our culture that is really, that some people feel was slightly lost, that they yearn for almost. So I think it again, there is definitely overlap with some of the things some of the other contributors have spoken about, and perhaps particularly the men's shed. I would say, TP, you're just all the things you were talking about there really rang bells for me. So that's essentially what social farming is, and how it addresses isolation is across, I suppose, three different levels. First is the participants who get to make these new connections in their local communities by going out and doing something worthwhile alongside other people. And then there's the farmers. Farming has become, as we know, very much a solo operation, a lonely operation in a lot of cases. So the farmers speak of their improved quality of life and, sense of purpose and increased sense of isolation, decreased sense of isolation. And then there's the wider kind of community benefits of it, but we can talk about that again anyway. So that's a kind of a very...
And some questions coming in via my text here on social farming, but I'll ask you a quick one before I go to Conor quickly. It's based in Leitrim. Are there social farms around the country? Or
absolutely, we have somewhere between sort of 70 and 100 active social farms in we've from Mallinhead down to Wexford down to West Cork. We have farms all over the country. We have our base is in here in Leitrim Development Company, it's our national office, but we have 3 regional hubs: Southwest Mayo, Waterford Leader Partnership, and Western Resources. And you can look on our website to make contact.
Yeah, people are just a quick question. Yeah. Conor, I'm told you have Kildare Talking. Will you tell me about keeping Kildare Talking and what's that about?
Yeah, I will, of course, Seamus. Earlier this year, I was involved with yourself, Irish Rural Link, and the Wheel in the Community Champions Programme. And that was a fantastic initiative that I suppose became part of the national COVID response. Myself and a number of my colleagues in Mointon na Tíre were involved in that. And we participated in the forums in the county councils, at the local authorities, and different partners at a local level. And I suppose a lot of this is about trying to find solutions and reaching out to people. And as Aisling talked about, there are things that people can be supported to do for themselves to be active, but then there's an onus on the community and for people to reach out to others who may not feel in a position to reach out themselves. So that's where the idea for Keep Kildare Talking came from. It was about trying to empower and encourage local people, communities, individuals to think about the simple things they could do, the difference they could make to reach out to vulnerable people. And people in the community who were isolated. And, and that came in many ways. We saw tremendous examples of all the practical stuff people did in terms of delivering groceries and medicines and so on. But people sometimes forget that, it can be just as important. The groceries might come once a week, but what happens the other 5 or 6 days? So it can be just as important and just as valuable to pick up the phone and make a phone call. And, any of us can do that. We have that power to do that, and we can use it. And I suppose that was where the idea came from. It was to get that message out and to think of all the different ways that we could talk, whether it's out for a walk, stopping, over the gate, using technology, indeed. A lot of people in this position are disadvantaged. They don't have access to technology. So we could, make that effort to reach out and help them maybe to communicate with their family, using various technology as well. So to consider those opportunities.
Finola, this is the harder side, I suppose. People, in a way, Conor is talking about an initiative that does keep people talking and keep people involved. And Aisling has made a very good point in terms of, task orientated as TP. How do you, like, when you come across people affected by loneliness, what's your first advice to them? What do you want them to do?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge it and say, I am feeling lonely, and to know what is that loneliness, because like, I know we were having a chat beforehand, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of worry, there's a lot of fear, and so we have to be able to ask ourselves, where is that coming from? Is it an over presentation by the media? And it's not that we need to bury our heads in the sand, but we also one of our campaigns in Mental Health Ireland at the outset of COVID was to communicate, to connect, and to reassure. And when you're doing that and having that chat, and like I've seen it in my own family, my own household, like it has discommoded people in different ways. And yet I know there's been a lot of very sad and very traumatic illnesses surrounded by COVID. But the thing is, it's right across the world, and we all have to work together. And you can never, ever, ever underestimate the value of talk and chat. And I know we've seen the lines add, like, and talk is invaluable, and we have to make space for that. And maybe to even say, when people are attending their GP, maybe for the GP to ask a person, are you feeling lonely? And open up the conversation and try to say, well, what can you do about it? Because like a tablet will clearly get rid of a headache, or if you have a pain in your tooth, going to the dentist will sort that out. But what do any of us need? And for loneliness, and it's not necessarily a rural problem either. I know we're focusing on rural Ireland, and that's 100%, but there's also young people in rural Ireland that are challenged by loneliness as well, and I suppose to try and understand the difference between feeling lonely and being alone is very important in terms of like it's just something kind of to add into that idea of mental health that we're all talking about, that it is about your physical health, it is about your social health. And ironically, when people are feeling potentially depressed or anxious, they often exclude the very person that can help them, somebody to talk to. They'll isolate themselves from that rather than admit that they're feeling depressed or potentially that they're at risk of it. So.
Indeed. No, I think that's important. I think Senator Roisin Garvey has made a number of points in the text at the moment, and obviously chasing solutions, etc. TP, COVID has really knocked us all senseless, I suppose, in many ways. Thankfully, if we don't have it, it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. And but it is frightening a lot of older people. From your perspective, and have the men's sheds been able to meet, or how are you managing?
I think that word fear is an overriding feeling among men in that age category, particularly that I spoke about earlier on. So it is quite difficult. Now we've made several efforts to open sheds and so on, and some sheds have opened, but with serious strictures placed on them in terms of all the distancing and everything that goes with that we're all familiar with now. So really, I'd say at the minute, a lot of men's sheds are struggling. They're keeping in contact by phone or by Zoom or by WhatsApp, which is another, Conor mentioned it there, the whole thing about technology is a huge element in all this. I think it's like something that we do need to address when this is over, that allow people to become more proficient in the use of technology, because a lot of that age bracket in the men's sheds, I won't say all of them, because some of them are fantastic with it, but there's quite a cohort of men in there that are afraid of technology, if you like, in terms of the smartphones and all this kind of stuff. So hard to get in, like we're not getting in touch with those guys. But basically what we do is, in our shed and in a lot of sheds, what they do is we kind of divvy it up between us. Like maybe we've about 20 men in our shed, so we kind of have like 4-5 groups of 4, that kind of thing, and they stay in touch. So were really struggling at the same time in terms of the communication and the face-to-face and meeting up and so on, because that's the strength of the men's sheds, actually the physical contact. And like what Aisling said there, the tasks, men don't talk face-to-face is kind of the motto. We talk shoulder to shoulder. We work best, we talk best when we're kind of engaged in some activity or task, that you'll tell me what to do and I'll say, oh, I didn't know that now, yeah, and all that kind of stuff. So really it is affecting men's shed, and there is an underlying fear, obviously, of COVID for the medicinal reasons, the medicine end of it. And I think Finola is right, you kind of mentioned it there. Like, I don't know how much of this is driven by the media, like the fear constantly being that people that are isolated and maybe living on their own, that don't get the opportunity to talk to other people, that can really get in on them. So,
and TP, are you hearing that fear articulated across the country, and is it contributing to a certain negative well-being as well?
I would say so. Like, I'd get it very hard to put figures on it because I don't have any research and it's just an opinion. But I'd know from contacting guys, you know, I suppose it's like preaching to the converted. The fellas that I'm meeting are guys that are kind of extroverts. They're out and about. They're in their car. They might be living on their own, but the car is another essential in rural Ireland. You know, somewhere you can hop into the car, go in town and get the few messages and go back home again, and you'll meet a few people. But for the people that don't drive, and for the people that, you know, I don't, you know, I can't comment on them people because I'm not meeting them. So I'm meeting the people that are actually coping quite well, because that cohort of men that I speak about, they're very resilient. You know, they've seen an awful lot in their lives in terms of even their own upbringings. A lot of them were actually socially isolated and they didn't even know it. I'd say it was the same myself, you know, the way we had rural isolation where I lived in Tipperary, a backwood, but I never knew the phrase rural isolation until recent times, you know, the way I've now become much more aware of it. So yeah, men's shed struggling at the moment a bit with this, definitely.
Well, we all are, I suppose, to a degree. Going to Aisling, I see Clodagh McGreehan. Thank you, Clodagh, for registering. I live in a social farm. Can this model be reciprocated or repeated, I suppose, in a voluntary way, grassroots way of engaging community in nature-based activities? This could open up a massive engagement instead of niche service. I don't know if you'd call it a niche service, Aisling. You're talking about 70 farms around the country. Are they all individuals, or can it be done in a community way?
Well, I mean, the social farming model that we're talking about in Social Farming Ireland is where people come, you know, in groups of maybe somewhere between 2 and 4. Usually 3 would be the average number of participants with working alongside the farmer, and that would be sort of the norm. And you know, it's normally mediated through a service. People come from a service, be that a mental health service, a youth service, intellectual disability service. That's how it works. I think Clodagh raises a very interesting point. I think social farming is very valuable in and of itself, and that sort of really quite intense, personalized individual approach that isn't just about getting people to have a nice day on a farm. I think that's important. It's outcome focused. It's about moving people along on a journey of, I suppose, self-improvement and improvements in confidence and well-being and all of that. So it's not just about the nice day out on the farm, and that's really important. But I think what social farming does highlight is a number of things. And this is why I suppose I find it so interesting as from a research perspective, is it also highlights, I think, some really important points about the value of nature-based approaches to well-being, you know, and that can absolutely be replicated. And we were increasingly hearing talk about things like, even, you know, which we can kind of half laugh at, but forest bathing and this whole idea of just spending time in nature, how really valuable it is for us, how much we've lost from not having that, and how much I think if there's one small glimmer that has come out of the whole last 6 or 9 months, I think more people are spending more time in nature to their benefit, to their great benefit. And social farming, we know that, and this is what we're learning from social farming and how, you know, how valuable that is. I certainly think there's more opportunities. I presume the kind of things Clodagh was talking about is things like community gardens, even just something like tidy towns, I think, which does address some of those sort of elements, and increasingly so, because I know that, I don't know much about tidy towns, but I believe it's more now about sort of heritage and you know, wild gardens and all of that sort of thing. So definitely think there's something about bringing people together in a natural setting, doing tasks that is really really valuable, and everyone can contribute their own bit. You know, some people are going to be stronger than others, some people are going to be more capable than others, some people have more knowledge than others, but coming together, everyone can do their bit. And I think that is very valuable, and that can be applied to a range of settings. It could be, you know, a group of people coming together to clear an area in a forest, you know, clear an area to, you know, make a little amenity area, or just tidy up some footpaths, or, you know. So I think social farming is one thing, and it's very much, you know, it's a particular kind of activity, I suppose, with a particular sort of purpose. But I think there's the whole wider area of green responses and nature-based responses and task-orientated responses has much wider applicability and much fewer, I suppose, resource or cost implications. You know, there's nothing to stop a group of people together and saying, let's go down to the river on a Saturday morning, clear away some of those rushes, and, you know, there's nothing to stop people doing that, I suppose, apart health and safety, I guess, and having a pair of waders. But you know the point I'm making, you know, and I think definitely there should be more of that. And I think it's one of the things I think it would be a great shame, and I think hopefully something like Tidy Towns is going to be in place next year. I know it sort of wasn't able to happen this year, but I think it would be a very great shame to let things like that go, because they have a value so much more than just creating something nice aesthetically. You know, it is about bringing people together with a shared purpose.
I think that's very important. I see David Wright, who puts it in very quickly. He's a proud Cavan man. They're now Ulster champions, so he's letting us know that. They had a great win over the weekend. And I think that's TP talking about Tipperary, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. But I think, David, you make a very good point. And Conor, I'm going to ask you, I suppose with Irish Rural Link, you work with us on this as well. The whole thing about, you know, the rural village reducing in terms of the number of people in it, the Garda station maybe closing, threats on the primary schools, and a lot of empty houses in some cases, especially in the really isolated areas. I suppose what I'm really saying, Conor, we know we need to deal with rural isolation, like the social farming, like men's sheds, and a whole range of other initiatives around. But we need people staying in the villages as well, don't we? And how will this COVID be an opportunity to bring back young people, do you think?
Well, I hope so, you know, absolutely. And look, in winter, that notion of the community having such a powerful and profound role is really important. And I know, you know, some of what's being mentioned here is about, you know, the personal piece, you know, about isolation. There are things that the individual can do, but what can the community do? What can those of us who are not experiencing isolation can do? And we can make a plan. You know, the individual can make a plan, but as a community, we can make a plan. And if we make a plan, we can make a difference. So, you know, that can take many forms. It could be like the groups that contacted me earlier during the year and, you know, took these are carbon monoxide alarms. A lot of the people who are isolated live in older homes. You know, they may not have the safety devices in their home. There's about 5,000 of these gone around the country at this stage. You know, that's reaching out to someone that's making a difference. It could be looking and saying, you know, yeah, we've lost our Garda station. We've lost our shop. What are we going to do? In my own village here in Kiltegan, we started a community shop and cafe. Now, it's hard. It's not easy. And there needs to be more supports for that to make that a viable option for a lot of communities. But it makes such a difference because it brings people together. And when you bring people together, they talk. When they talk, they generate ideas. You know, connections are made, new things can start. So we need to put structures in place to make it easier for communities to do those things. There's a lot of goodwill out there, but sometimes people don't know where to start. They come to us, they come to Rural Link, they come to Mointon na Tíre for that support, and we try and give it to them. But, you know, there's a bigger picture there, and definitely making our villages vibrant places to live, you know, making it attractive to move into a village is tremendously important, because without those cores, those hubs, those little market towns and villages, you know, you're going to be struggling. And a TP mentioned the technology piece. In some ways, you know, maybe there's a huge opportunity there. We can see at the moment so many people are working from home, not necessarily of their choosing, but, you know, there's a great change happening. Some of it may go back to normal after, but for some people, they'll want to retain some of that. And how do we make sure that the communities can facilitate that? Obviously, broadband is a big part of that, but there are other technology aspects to it as well, whether it's, you know, digital hubs and things like that. So everything we do in that regard is really important, but we need to give communities the tools and the resources to make it happen at a local level.
I think we do, and I think really, I do think it does offer an opportunity to get people back into staying in their own areas, and the more people, the better chance we have of developing other initiatives. And I think your work in this area is very good. I know, Finola, there's one of the persons has written in, and he's, or she, it could be because they're anonymous, but I suppose they're looking for help in a way. They say that this person is coming from the Cooley Peninsula, and this might be covered in your area in Louth. Finola, as usual, I would think there's not enough of you around the place, or officers. Are we resourcing people to do the kind of job you do? Is there enough people doing that job? And how can that be broadened and extended?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, how do I respond to that in a sense, because, and thanks for the acknowledgement of the role we play in our organization. I think, like, it's all about leadership, what we're talking about here. And I think that leadership, like Ashton has spoken about the Social Farming Ireland, I've been very privileged to be delivering a number of workshops to those social farmers relative to mental health. And you get all that sense, absolutely, that Ashton has talked about. It's like some of the participants will actually, the farmers, the host family, say how much they get out of it. So it's win-win all the way around, and that's invaluable. I have been so privileged, TP, to have gone to so many men's sheds up in Cooley as well. And you just have the most fantastic day's work learning from these guys. Like, you're there meaning to share with them, but you actually end up coming away with so much more. And like, I don't know, Seamus, that there's an absolute direct answer to your question. I think people have to find that personal motivation to make that effort, to seek that support. And sometimes it's not always, like, I often feel, especially with mental health, it's not necessarily about money and having money to do things. It's about having access to opportunity and to creating that. Like, we had a lovely project online here in the Midlands. It was led out by social artist Rosalind Heaven with Mullingar Mental Health Association and the HSE, and where we brought 12 people that are using the mental health services. And we've been doing it for the last number of years. And we said, oh gosh, what's going to happen now? And all 12 participants that volunteered for, wanted to become, we did Rosalind it out in an art project for 12 weeks. And the communication and the connection from that was just like powerful. And because we had funds from it, we I just have it here with me. We produced this as a publication. And I would just like to read out just one of the poems, because it says a lot for any of us. Behind closed doors, we were told to stay far away from all others, from school, from family, and from friends. Most people, they felt smothered. For me, though, it's not the same, protected and safe from having to leave. The door that's imprisons most inside is sanctuary for me, I perceive. So it's all about perspective, say, and I know kind of the language around COVID, physical distance, social isolation, not more than 25 gatherings. That's all about respect, but I think it could have been put, like, to talk about lockdown. Like, nobody was really locked down. We had Storm Ophelia, like, that was locked down for a period of a few days, and farmers were protecting their property and their sheds and everything. But really, we were not locked down. We might have been like logistically we were restricted, but we weren't locked down. We could still communicate. But it's back to what we're all saying here. It's the message that was being put out to us. And, you know, and I'm at a point now, like, it even happened this morning, I get out of my car, no mask. It's like getting into your car now and not putting on your seatbelt. And you just feel very naked if you turn up someplace, no mask, oh my God, kind of thing. So I think we have to find that personal motivation, but we need direction on it, Seamus. And there are many organisations comparable to ourselves, like Winter Material, like the Men's Shed, like Social Farming Ireland, and many more, the Third Age. They are doing an awful lot to keep people connected. But people must buy into it.
Absolutely. TP, Martin Corcoran is saying it's not just a rural thing, it's an urban. Are there any men's sheds in the urban areas at all, or how is that working?
Yeah, well, in Ireland, roughly at the moment, about 450 sheds. So yeah, absolutely. Dublin, Limerick, Waterford, Galway, every towns, you know, the towns and villages. So sheds aren't just the preserve of the rural. Like the guys in Dublin have, I don't know how many sheds they have, but they've quite a number of sheds, and I've met with them and visited their sheds and so on. So no, there's a common theme there. Just to refer back to something that you mentioned earlier on, Seamus, as well, and Connor mentioned it there. When this is all over, which it will be eventually, hopefully, like what can we learn from it? Well, what I think one of the things would be relative to, Connor mentioned it as well. I thought he was very, very well put, the way he put it there. Community for me is so important and was never more important than it is now. And I think particularly with men's sheds, and I mentioned the technology, like a lot of our towns and villages now have schools which are highly equipped to a high standard with computer labs and the devil knows what. And I think they need to be brought into use more because they lie idle. I'm an ex-teacher myself, so I'm quite familiar with this. And I'm not saying this is across the board, but I'm saying like Kilbeggan, small village, fine secondary school, fine primary school, has an outreach, a youth reach centre as well. Fantastic people at work in them all. But those facilities lie idle all summer long, by and large, at night time, by and large. And I think they have they are resourced from the Department of Education. They're paid for by the taxpayer. I think there should be more of an open door policy for the likes of men's sheds, for example. If we wanted to upskill and learn our technology, we don't have the capacity to do that in our men's shed because our men's shed is very basic. We're talking prefabs and, you know, quite substandard in a kind of a way, but it is what it is. But I just think that's one of the things for me that should come out of this, that facilities in our community should be more open to the community at large. And the second thing, I think, just referring back to something Connor said as well, and Finola and indeed Aisling, like I'm sitting here in Gort this minute, parked up, as you mentioned, in the van, and there's a lake to my left-hand side here. And the amount of people that are out walking and running and wheeling buggies and the devil knows what, lovely people, and they're rediscovering the nature. And we've mentioned that earlier on. I think Ireland, we've discovered through the COVID, Ireland's a beautiful country. We have an awful lot of natural resources that we maybe didn't value up to now. And thankfully the government, and I'd say hats off to the Green Party, they're making us more aware of what we have in terms of green out there, in terms of the fresh air, the wildlife. We don't have to be snuggled up all the time in our warm, comfortable, lovely, comfortable homes. You know, the amount of people that are out here walking this morning, it's incredible. So I'm delighted to see that that's happening countrywide. There are more facilities opening up. And that's a great opportunity, like what Connor said as well, to meet with people.
Yeah.
You know, you're out walking, you see somebody, you'll have a chat.
Yeah.
So that's just
Roisin, or Aisling, I should say, in terms of social farming, I'm just thinking it's a broader question. I know it's an initiative with all sorts of ages of people. How do young people get into this as well? Because I think the initiatives that see young people, older people, and people of all ages mix, it also helps to brighten things up. Are there many young people involved in the social farming?
Absolutely, lots. I mean, lots of young people who come from all sorts of different types of services, obviously mental health or intellectual disability, but also young people who are coming, you know, almost within the youth category. We've had some very successful placements with Leaving Cert applied students going out to social farming. These would be, you know, some of these younger people would have various challenges in their lives, you know, maybe sometimes quite chaotic home lives, not maybe suited to mainstream schooling. Their teachers are trying to get them to hang on in there, basically. And social farming is one of those great initiatives that I suppose encourages them to hang on in there. Farmers acting as sort of role models, modeling positive kind of family culture, all of those things. So yeah, young people are one of our very much growing areas. We have young people coming from the foster care system, you know, all of that. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to connect young people with their roots, literally with roots, you know. It's the whole idea of the land and grounding people and taking them away from maybe I suppose the confusions of modern life almost, and the overwhelmingness of modern life, and then social media and all of those kind of things. There's something very grounding and powerful about, you know, scraping out a yard or feeding the cattle or whatever. It just brings people back to themselves and back to them, or more grounded themselves. I wanted to make a couple of points, Seamus, on foot of something a few things other people said. And there was a question around, are there enough Finolas around? And no doubt we could always do with more Finolas. But I think one of the things, really important things about social farming, and I think, you know, not just social farming, but a growing sense across a lot of different services, it's not necessarily always about having more clinicians or professionals working with people. I think one of the things we see our role is in social farming is providing opportunities for people to have, that the professional's role in some ways is to empower people and provide supports to people to make ordinary, natural connections in ordinary life. Not necessarily to have people siloed off into particular kinds of services, or to only be hanging around with people who are in their category, if you know what I mean, but to break those barriers in some ways and provide, as I said, so a lot of people who do social farming will say, you know, after 8 weeks of social farming, they might say, I've told the farmer things I never told any professional, and I've been interacting with the mental health services for 10, 15 years, and I've told him things I never told anybody, because it's a non-clinical relationship. I think that's what I suppose I'm very much focused on people who present themselves as being challenges. You know, I'm not talking about the kind of ordinary massive people, all of whom we're all struggling in our own ways, I suppose, but I'm talking about people who may be presenting to a service with a particular challenge. And what they are craving, and I think what we're all craving, is just natural, ordinary connections. I mean, we were talking about yesterday, we were chatting, the opportunity to go and do something like social dancing, you know, just to have fun. It's not necessarily all about being serious and, you know, doing things that are mediated by professionals or organized by professionals. It's about just the opportunity for fun and crack and connecting with all sorts of different people. And that's what, you know, one of the things that social farming manages to do, it breaks some of those barriers. So on a typical day in a social farming, you might have the farmer, one of their kids might be around, a neighbour might call in, you'll have the participants, you might have 1 or 2 support workers if needed, but everyone is there together with their wellies on, with their hands in the soil, and they're all equal, you know, and that's what's, I think, really important. We have to, and with those same sort of silos, even in a community where you have X organisation builds its building, and then you've got the school, and then you've got the other organisation with its building, we have to start thinking, what are the resources we have here that we can all use, rather than just constantly reinventing the wheel and building new things. You know, there was just a couple of the points I wanted to make on foot.
Actually, you're right. You mentioned social dancing, and I know lots of people, there's a debate in many households, which do they miss more, the mass or the social dancing, which we'll see what people think about that. But seriously, Conor, you know, it is a big deal. Like some of the, like mass for those in our church and the Christian traditions, or indeed other religions, they're not happening. And of course, the social dancing isn't happening either. I mean, is this, even in urban areas in Kildare and other places, is this a problem as well? And is it contributing in your eyes as well to isolation?
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's the scaffolding for a lot of people. You know, they build their life, they construct their life around various things, and for some people, that's one of those key things they hold on to, and it's part of the routine. I know people who profoundly miss that. I do know some people who've been motivated to get online to go to mass, and that's been the thing, the trigger for them to learn to take that tablet and find out how to use it. And it's one of the things I've, you know, tried to harness that motivation to say to community groups that, look, there's a lot of people are missing certain things now, and maybe they'll give something a go that they wouldn't have before, you know. So there's huge potential in that. But yes, those things are really missed, and that's, you know, the thing I was coming back to about the community making a plan. There's a real reluctance to plan. You know, there's a real fear factor. There's an awful lot of groups, and it was mentioned earlier about, you know, not everything should be left to the professionals and services and so on. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's really true, you know, because there's a lot of talk about the hard to reach. And like, the hard to reach will only be reached by their family and very close neighbors. You know, the other services can't get to those people. You need someone who has that contact, who can open that door, can make that call, and can say hello and start that conversation. And by all means, then those people, they need support. They need to know where they can go to get help, where they can refer someone. Absolutely. So there's a big thing around that. One really practical thing we've been doing at the moment, I've started doing, is at this time of year, we would have meetings with the Gardaí, because community safety is our core thing in community alert. So the Gardaí and the community linking together, and we would have district meetings where the leaders of the community groups get to meet with the Gardaí at a local level. That's a physical gathering. You can't have that now at the moment. So what we've done is I've organized Zoom meetings for those, and we've trained some of the local volunteers to come on those meetings, and they've met, and it's really struck me how appreciative they are of that opportunity to speak to each other, to hear, to share their experience, to hear that some, other groups have the same problems, and then to get to talk to the Gardaí as well. And the Gardaí are delighted as well, because they're getting to hear firsthand what people's experience is locally in communities. And, they obviously have a huge role in all of this. And those groups then, can think about, well, maybe we could use our text alert. We can send out a message at the moment and utilize that. And we could really think about, how do we help the Gardaí with our vulnerable persons register? The Gardaí keep that list. It needs to be updated. Its communities really help to do that.
PP, if I may come to you, because there's a bit of a question here, but in terms of, well, we talk about social dancing as well, or maybe that's what we should call it, and see what you think of that. But in terms of moving forward into next year, what's your hopes? And Tom Lavin, our chairperson, has another question here. What would you do if there was one thing you'd like to see happening to give a bit of hope to people? What would you like to see happening?
Oh, good. I don't know if I have an answer to that one, Seamus. What would I like to see happening? Yeah, I think actually I'd echo an awful lot of what Conor has just said. I would hope to see much more community-based support across the board. Like, we're back on our own resources now, effectively. Community can be so important. And I think that kind of maybe gets lost a little bit in modern life. Like, the internet and the devil knows what, but it's still hard to beat the community and people knowing each other. And like Conor says, knowing where the vulnerable people are, that somebody local can see, like, what do we need to do to help? I know men, for example, in my area that should be in a men's shed. And I've approached them, and obviously I didn't use the right approach in some cases. They didn't come along, and some did. But like, I think I'd agree with Conor. It's going to be somebody local that ticks the right box or presses the right button that gets those men to join that men's shed. And it's not going to be, it's not going to come from on high, if you like. It's not going to come from government directive or something. And in regards to the men's shed, I think going forward, I'd like to see more men, I suppose, obviously, because sheds are fine, but sheds are just buildings. It's the men. We need the men to join the sheds, and women's sheds is beginning to come on stream as well, so, and that's fantastic. But I think essentially that's what I'd like to see. I know there's a plethora of men in Kilbeggan and across the country, I'm sure, that would not alone benefit from being in a men's shed, but would be of huge benefit to the men's shed, because they can all bring so much to it. Every single man that comes in the door of the shed mightn't feel that they're talented or gifted or whatever happens to be, but I can tell you they are. They all make a contribution. So that'd be my wish.
And I presume, TP, when you said every single man, you meant married man and any other man that wants to come in as well.
Well, I feel sorry for the married men, but you're looking, they have, yeah, no, of course,
Okay.
yeah.
Fionnuala, going back to Tom Lavin's question, what would one thing you'd like to see happening?
Just everything I think we're all saying here, the importance of community, the importance of connection. But I think maybe it's about, the persons that TP has spoken to, and I know TP's approach will be 100% accurate and the interest and the support for the development of the men's shed. It's about how do you reach out to that person, and it's what's in their mind, and then maybe they feel uncomfortable and maybe lacking in confidence. So it might be to encourage a partnership, a buddy system, a friendship system, and to give people that confidence to say, come along. But often people will resist that. And because they might think, well, what will people think? It's kind of going back to what I was saying earlier on about mental health. Have a talk in the community about mental health. Will anybody turn up? But put it in some other framework, or have a different kind of ambience around it. You will get your people. So it's about, I think maybe TP, it's about language and it's about reaching out to the people. You see, the people that are coming are the ones that are winning by and large. So and that's just a small percentage of people that can benefit from all that's on offer here this morning. So I think it's about breaking down barriers, and that image is very important, and that we need a more positive. See, I don't think it's always about money and giving. It's about people and their outlooks and their support, and just kind of looking after themselves as well.
And Aisling, if you had something to do, obviously you want to see a wider network of farms, but what would you look for?
Yeah, I mean, look, in the terms of the narrow social farming field, obviously we would like continued funding, continued support for people who want to be able to do social farming. We would like anyone in any community in the country who thinks they could benefit from to be able to do it, for there to be a farmer nearby, and that will be supported and funded. So obviously that's the kind of more narrow social farming. And on the wider perspective, I think what's really crucial, and Fionnuala touched on it, and I'm so glad you picked up on that in relation to social farming, is this whole idea of mutual benefit. This is not about us whose lives are good helping those whose lives are not good. You know what I mean? That's a very binary way of thinking. I think it's really about all of us realizing our vulnerabilities, our gifts, our talents, sharing them with one another. Some of us have been luckier in life than others, and I think it's about maybe I'm being very idealistic, but a sort of a mindset shift to thinking more of mutual benefit, that, the rewards of a more connected people and, less are there for everybody. They're not just about helping people. They're about building better lives for all of us, where everyone has the potential and the opportunity to contribute, and also to be supported when needed. And that's, I suppose, my very idealistic perhaps vision. But I feel some of what's happened in the last few months I think people have been humbled maybe a little bit too, people who maybe were living the fast life and the good life. And, I think it has maybe done some people no harm to kind of, as I said, have to take a little step back and, be humbled a little bit. So as I said, I'm rambling now probably, but anyway,
No, I think going back to you, Conor, Roisin Garvey has said she spent the first part of the lockdown delivering water for people. You were part of the Community Champions Programme, which we and Irish Rural Link and the Wheel were involved in. What did you learn from that programme? Should we be thinking of some kind of network like this going into the future?
Absolutely. Oh my God. I mean, the thing that really struck me was that there was partnerships forged during that time that would not have happened otherwise. There was organizations working together in different counties who, just didn't have the opportunity for their paths to cross before. And it made that possible. I was lucky enough to be involved in a few counties, and I felt that was really valuable as well, because you could see, a good idea in one county could be brought to the neighbor and so on. So those kinds of networks are really important. Organizations being given the time and the space and just creating that opportunity for them to talk, to come up with ideas and to work together. There is a huge amount of talk about community in this country. There's a huge expectation of what community can do. And, we are very good at it in some ways, but we're not always as good at it as we think. There are good ideas in other countries as well. The community shop model came from abroad. That originally started with a cooperative movement that started here. So these things go around, they move around. Something that's very often the bread and butter of what I'm involved in is the fear of crime. That's a huge driver for a lot of people in normal times. That fear of crime hasn't been as strong of late because crime went down during the lockdown. That was one of the good things, you could say, it went down. Unfortunately, that's temporary. But as the fear of crime went down, the fear of the pandemic went up. So that we're constantly dealing with that battle about how to address people's fears, how to help them recognize them, acknowledge them, as Fionnuala talked about. But also, like the thing Aisling mentioned, it's not about us being the good people helping other people. It's good for us all. If we do this, it's better for us. It's better for the other people on the other side of the table, the other side of the kettle, at the other side of the field, whatever it is. So if we can all work together and support each other, it makes a huge difference.
I think Níor Gorla Kayla, we in it together. Absolutely. Coming to the end right now, unfortunately, time is against us. First of all, I really would like to thank the many people who wrote in questions and hopefully got answers in this discussion. I'd like to thank sincerely Finola Colgan and Mental Health. I'd like to thank Aisling Moroney, Social Farms, go on the website, Conor O'Leary, Winter Natira, and of course TP O'Gorman in Gort, in the van somewhere, and hopefully your day will get better, TP, as you travel on. But you work with the men's sheds who do fantastic work. So to all of you, I really do thank you for this discussion, and hopefully to those of you who listened in or who will watch this on YouTube later on, it will be well worth it. And of course, as I say, if you want to join Irish Rural Link, by all means, or indeed the other organisations, go on our websites. And next week, we hope to have the old discussion on digital connectivity, and I'm sure you four will be very interested in this as well. Clearly, broadband is seen now as a great thing, even though there was lots of people saying it was too costly and all the rest. But digital connectivity, and Conor touched on Zoom meetings and stuff like that, it's majorly important, and we'll have a large discussion on that this day week, 10 o'clock. Please join in, those of you who found this morning's enjoyable. Have a good day, and thank you very much.